You won't believe the chaos that unfolded when my entitled HOA neighbor refused to stop parking in my private driveway. Before we dive into today's wild story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you amazing stories like this one. Moving into my new house was supposed to be a dream come true. It was a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, and I was excited to finally have a space that was completely mine. But almost immediately, I ran into a problem. My neighbor, Karen. She was one of those stereotypical HOA board members, the kind who treated the entire neighborhood as if she personally owned it. I had barely finished unpacking when I noticed something strange, a white luxury SUV sitting in my driveway. At first, I thought maybe it belonged to a moving crew or a visitor who got confused. But after checking with my neighbors, I quickly realized the car belonged to Karen. At that point, I wasn't upset, just a little confused. I knocked on her door and politely introduced myself, mentioning that her car was in my driveway. Karen, a blonde woman in her mid-50s with an almost permanent scowl, barely looked up from her phone as she waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, that? Yeah. I just parked there because my driveway was full and the street was packed. Hope you don't mind." I was caught off guard by how casually she said it, as if it were completely normal to park in a stranger's driveway. Still, I wanted to be reasonable. "Actually, I do need my driveway clear," I said with a friendly tone. "Would you mind moving it?" She sighed dramatically, like I had just asked her to move a mountain. "Fine, fine," she muttered, grabbing her keys and walking past me without another word. She got her car, reversed out of my driveway, and parked in front of her house. No apology, no acknowledgement that what she did was wrong, just pure entitlement. I figured that was the end of it, but I was wrong. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I looked outside my window, and there it was again. The same white SUV parked right in my driveway like it belonged there. This time, I wasn't as patient. I walked over to her house and knocked harder than before. She answered with a fake surprised expression. "Oh, is my car in your driveway again?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Yes, it is," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I really need you to stop parking there. It's private property." Karen laughed, like I had just said the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. "Oh, come on. It's not like you're using it all the time. I figure it wouldn't be a big deal." I took a deep breath. "It is a big deal. This is my home, my property. You can't just park here whenever you feel like it." She rolled her eyes. "You're new here, so let me explain something. This neighborhood works together. If someone needs a spot, we help each other out." I wasn't sure if she was serious. Helping each other out means asking first. "You didn't ask. You just took." Karen crossed her arms. "Well, if you're going to be that difficult about it, fine. I'll move it." And she did. But this became a pattern. Over the next few weeks, she continued to park in my driveway almost every day. Sometimes, she would leave her car there overnight. Other times, she would park just long enough to inconvenience me, blocking my garage when I was trying to leave for work. Every single time, I had to knock on her door and demand that she move it. And every single time, she acted like I was the problem. I tried everything to get her to stop. I left polite notes on her windshield. I sent an email to the HOA explaining the situation. But it was clear that Karen had influence over them because they completely ignored my complaint. One day, I decided to confront her more directly. "Karen, this has to stop," I said firmly when she opened her door. She smirked. "Or what?" I was stunned. "What do you mean, or what? It's my driveway." Yeah, she said, waving me off. "Listen, I already talked to the HOA, and they don't see an issue with it." That's when I realized what was really happening. Karen wasn't just being annoying. She genuinely believed she was entitled to use my driveway. And worse, she had the HOA wrapped around her finger. The final straw came one evening when I got home late from work. It had been a long, exhausting day, and all I wanted to do was park my car, go inside, and relax. But when I turned onto my street, I saw it. Karen's SUV was sitting in my driveway again. Only this time, she had parked at an angle, completely blocking my garage. I honked my horn, expecting her to come outside. Nothing. I honked again. Still nothing. My blood was boiling at this point. I was beyond done. With no other choice, I had to park several houses down the street and walk home in the dark. The next morning, I marched up to her house and knocked so hard I thought I might break the door. Karen answered in her robe, holding a cup of coffee. "Oh, it's you," she said flatly. "Move. Your car," I said through clenched teeth. She took a sip of her coffee and shrugged. "I'll move it when I'm ready." I was done playing nice. "Karen, this is the last time I'm going to tell you. If you park in my driveway again, I'm going to tow your car." She laughed, actually laughed in my face. "You wouldn't dare." I took a step forward and looked her dead in the eye. "Try me." She just rolled her eyes and shut the door in my face. That was it. No more warnings. No more patience. Karen had just made the worst mistake of her life, and she had no idea what was coming next. The morning after Karen dismissed me for the last time, I woke up with a new sense of determination. I had tried everything, politeness, reasoning, even involving the HOA, but nothing worked. She had continued to park in my driveway as if it were her personal property, completely ignoring my warnings. Well, today was the day that changed. I grabbed my phone and called the local towing company. The operator was professional, asking me a few basic questions about the situation. "So, to confirm, this is private property, and the vehicle is parked there without permission?" "That's correct," I said firmly. "Do you have any signs posted?" I hesitated. "No, but I own the property. I have proof." "That's good enough," the operator said. "We'll send a tow truck over if you give us the signal. Just call us when it happens again." I thanked them and ended the call. Now all I had to do was wait. And I didn't have to wait long. That very evening, after returning home from work, I pulled onto my street, and, just as I expected, Karen's white luxury SUV was parked in my driveway again. This time, it was angled slightly to block access to my garage, as if she had deliberately made it harder for me to park. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't carelessness. This was outright disrespect. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and called the towing company. "It's happening," I told them. "She's here right now." "Got it," the operator responded. "We'll have a truck there within 20 minutes." I leaned against my car, arms crossed, watching the scene as I waited. I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. For weeks, I had been fighting a losing battle with Karen, but tonight, she was finally about to face the consequences of her entitlement. Sure enough, the tow truck rolled onto my street exactly 20 minutes later, its bright orange lights flashing. The driver, a stocky guy with a beard and a clipboard, stepped out and walked toward me. "This the one?" he asked, jerking his thumb toward Karen's SUV. "That's the one," I confirmed. He nodded and got to work, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. He hooked the chains to her front wheels, adjusted the hydraulic lift, and within minutes, the SUV's tires were hovering above the ground. That's when the chaos started. Just as the truck began lifting Karen's car, her front door flew open, and out she came, wearing a robe, slippers, and an expression of absolute fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screeched, her voice slicing through the quiet evening air. The tow truck driver barely glanced at her. "Towing an illegally parked vehicle, ma'am." "That's my car," she shrieked, stomping toward us. "Put it down right now." The driver didn't even slow down. "You'll have to take that up with the property owner," he said, pointing at me. Karen spun toward me, her face twisted in outrage. "You can't do this." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? On my property?" "This is community property," she insisted, her voice getting more desperate. "You don't even use your driveway all the time. What's the big deal?" I let out a humorless laugh. "The big deal is that it's my driveway, not yours. And I told you, repeatedly, to stop parking here." Karen let out an exaggerated gasp, like I had just slapped her. "I have rights," she shrieked. "I'm a board member of this HOA, and that gives you permission to steal my driveway." I shot back. Instead of answering, Karen lunged for the tow truck, grabbing onto the chain that held her car. "You're not taking my SUV anywhere," she cried, clinging to it like her life depended on it. The tow truck driver sighed. "Ma'am, if you don't let go, I'll have to call the police." Karen's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare." I pulled out my phone and showed her my screen. "Try me." She hesitated for a moment, her grip on the chain tightening. But instead of backing down, she switched tactics entirely. "I'll sue you," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. I'll take you to court for harassment. I'll have you kicked out of this neighborhood. Do you know who I am? I folded my arms. Yeah, you're the lady getting her car towed because she doesn't respect private property. That only made her angrier. Without warning, she lunged at me, her hands flailing. But before she could even touch me, the tow truck driver stepped in between us. All right, that's it, he said, pulling out his own phone. I'm calling the cops. Karen's face paled. No, wait, you don't have to do that. Oh, I think I do, he said, dialing. You just attempted to assault someone over a parking spot. That's not going to fly. Karen suddenly switched tactics again. She dropped her knees. Yes, actually dropped her knees and clasped her hands together in a pleading motion. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Please don't tow my car. I promise I won't park here again. Just let me off this one time. I stared at her, almost in disbelief. Just minutes ago, she was threatening me, and now she was begging? The tow truck driver looked at me. It's your call. I hesitated for just a moment. Then I thought about all the nights I had to park down the street, the constant battles with the HOA, and the pure entitlement she had displayed. I turned to the driver and nodded. Take it, Karen shrieked as the tow truck started pulling away. You can't do this to me. I'll get you for this. But there was nothing she could do. The truck disappeared down the street, and her precious car was gone. She stood there, panting, her hands clenched into fists. Then, without another word, she stormed back into her house and slammed the door so hard I thought the windows might shatter. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The silence that followed was almost peaceful. For the first time in weeks, my driveway was empty. And Karen? Well, she was about to learn that actions have consequences. Because this wasn't over yet. The morning after Karen's car was towed, I expected some sort of retaliation. After all, she had screamed threats at me while the tow truck drove away, promising to make my life miserable. But as I stepped outside, sipping my coffee and enjoying the peaceful sight of my empty driveway, I noticed something surprising. Her house was quiet. No banging doors, no angry footsteps, no shouting through the neighborhood. Maybe she had finally learned her lesson. Or so I thought. Around noon, just as I was about to run some errands, I heard a loud knock on my front door. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. Sure enough, Karen stood on my porch, arms crossed, face twisted in rage. But this time, she wasn't alone. A tall, middle-aged man in a suit stood beside her, holding a clipboard. You're in big trouble, Karen hissed before I could say a word. I brought someone from the HOA, and you're going to pay for what you did. I turned to the man. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight as if he didn't want to be here. And you are? I asked. He cleared his throat. My name is Mr. Daniels. I'm the HOA compliance officer. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what exactly am I in trouble for? Karen smirked, clearly thinking she had me trapped. For violating HOA regulations. You're not allowed to tow a resident's car without board approval. I almost laughed. Karen, you parked on my property. That has nothing to do with the HOA. Her smirk faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. Actually, it does. The HOA has rules about disputes between neighbors, and you didn't follow the proper process. Mr. Daniels, tell him. Daniels sighed. Technically, homeowners are supposed to file a formal complaint before taking any drastic actions like towing. I folded my arms. I did file a complaint, multiple, in fact. Karen ignored them. I even asked the HOA to step in, and they did nothing. Daniels flipped through his clipboard, checking the paperwork. His face shifted slightly, and I knew he had found the reports. Karen, noticing his hesitation, rushed to fill the silence. He can't prove I was parking there, she blurted. Maybe he had someone else's car towed and is blaming me. I pulled out my phone and showed them both the dozens of photos and videos I had taken over the past few weeks. Each one showed Karen's SUV in my driveway, blocking access to my garage. Daniel's expression hardened. He let out a slow breath and turned to Karen. Mrs. Patterson, it's very clear that you were in the wrong here. Karen's face turned red. What? No. He is the one who. Daniels cut her off. The HOA does not have authority over someone's private property. If he wanted to tow your car, that's completely within his rights. Karen gasped, her hands flying to her chest like she had just been personally attacked. But I'm a board member. That doesn't matter, Daniel said. This is not an HOA issue. Karen turned back to me, her face full of fury. You'll regret this, she spat. I sighed. Karen, just accept that you messed up. Move on. But Karen wasn't done. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You haven't heard the last of this. Then she whirled around and stormed off, slamming the door to her house behind her. Daniels gave me a sympathetic look. I'll be honest. We've had multiple complaints about her before. If she tries anything else, let us know. I nodded, thanking him before heading back inside. I thought that was the end of it. Later that evening, just as I was settling in for the night, I heard shouting outside. I peeked through my blinds and saw Karen in my driveway again, this time with a bat. She was standing in front of my car, screaming, waving the bat around like a lunatic. You think you can humiliate me? She shrieked. You think you could just take my car and get away with it? I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My neighbor is in my driveway, screaming and waving a bat around. She's threatening my property. Stay inside, sir. Officers are on their way. I kept an eye on Karen from behind the curtains. She was pacing back and forth, muttering angrily, her grip on the bat tightening. My heart pounded, but I knew I had done the right thing by calling the police. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street. A patrol car pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out. Karen froze. One officer, a tall woman with short hair, approached her. Ma'am, drop the bat. Karen's head snapped toward them, her eyes wild. This is his fault, she shouted, pointing at my house. He got my car towed. He started all of this. The second officer, a stocky man with a calm demeanor, spoke next. That doesn't give you the right to trespass and threaten his property. Karen shook her head furiously. You don't understand. I live here. I'm on the HOA board. He's breaking community rules. The first officer sighed. Ma'am, that has nothing to do with why we're here. Put the bat down now. Karen's hands trembled. For a second, I thought she might actually try to argue more. But then she seemed to realize she was cornered. With a loud huff, she threw the bat onto the ground and crossed her arms. There, happy. The officers glanced at each other before one of them stepped forward. Turn around. Karen blinked. What? You're under arrest for trespassing, destruction of property, and making threats. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't arrest me. They didn't argue. They simply cuffed her. As they led her toward the patrol car, she thrashed and screamed. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the HOA president. You can't do this to me. But they did. I watched as the patrol car drove away, taking Karen with it. The neighborhood was silent again. For the first time in weeks, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. No more blocked driveway. No more entitlement. No more screaming. Karen spent the night in jail. The next day, she was released, but the damage was done. The HOA held an emergency meeting and voted her off the board. She had lost all of her power. And best of all, she never parked in my driveway again. In fact, she barely left her house after that. A few months later, I saw a for sale sign go up in her yard. Karen was gone. And I? Well, I finally had my peace. Some battles are won with patience. Others are won with a tow truck and a little bit of karma. I was wrong.